All right, let's dive into what might just be the most intense chapter in the Gospels, Mark chapter 12. This is it, the final week, and Jesus is facing a series of high-stakes public showdowns with the entire religious establishment right in the heart of Jerusalem. It's a chapter that's absolutely packed with traps, brilliant answers, and, some really profound lessons on faith.
So picture this. The scene is the temple court. Jesus has just turned the tables, literally, by cleansing it, and in doing so, he's asserted his authority. Now, his opponents are lining up. We're talking about the Pharisees, the Herodians, the Sadducees. These are groups that often couldn't agree on anything, but now they're united with one single goal: to trap Jesus in his own words.
But here's the thing. Jesus doesn't wait for them to attack. Nope, he goes on the offensive. He launches right into this powerful parable, and it's aimed directly at the chief priests, scribes, and elders who had just been questioning where he got his authority.
He tells this story about a vineyard owner who leases out his property. When it's time to collect his share of the fruit, the owner sends his servants. But the tenants react with this escalating violence. It's pretty brutal. As you can see, first they just beat a servant, then they stoned another one, and eventually they're just killing them. The whole story builds to this final horrific act. They murder the owner's own beloved son.
Now, for the people listening, the symbolism here was impossible to miss. They knew from the prophet Isaiah that the vineyard represented Israel. The owner was clearly God. And the tenants? Well, they were the religious leaders standing right in front of him. The servants were the prophets that Israel had rejected throughout its history. And the beloved son, everyone knew he was talking about himself, even predicting his own fate. And just to make sure they get it, Jesus drives the point home by quoting Psalm 118, verse 22. He basically says, I'm the cornerstone that you builders have rejected. I mean, Mark chapter 12, verse 12 says it all. They knew he had spoken this parable against them, and they were absolutely furious.
Okay, so now comes the counterattack. After being exposed like that, the leaders regroup. And what they do is they send out these waves of questioners, each one with a carefully designed trap that's meant to either discredit him or, honestly, to get him killed.
And first up, we have this really strange team-up, the Pharisees and the Herodians. These two groups were normally bitter political enemies. You had the Pharisees, who hated Roman rule, and the Herodians, who worked with them. But their shared hatred for Jesus, that brought them together.
So they come up to him, and after some really fake flattery, they spring their trap. And the question is just brilliant in how wicked it is. Mark chapter 12, verse 14. They ask, is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or not? Think about it. If he says yes, he turns the Jewish people against him. If he says no, he's guilty of treason against Rome. It feels like there's no way out.
But Jesus, wow, he just masterfully sidesteps the whole thing. He asks for a coin, points to Caesar's image on it, and acknowledges a basic civic duty. But then he immediately flips it to a much, much greater principle. As he says in verse 17, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And since we are all made in God's image, our ultimate allegiance, our entire lives, belong to him. So, with that political trap completely foiled, the theological experts decide to step in, the Sadducees. Now, this group didn't believe in the resurrection, or angels, or spirits. So they come up with this ridiculous hypothetical story about a woman who marries 7 brothers in a row, all to make the very idea of an afterlife sound absurd. And Jesus just immediately cuts right to the heart of their problem. In Mark chapter 12, verse 24, he tells them their mistake comes from 2 huge failures. They don't know the scriptures, and they don't know the power of God. He explains that life in the resurrection isn't just going to be a replay of life on earth, it's a totally transformed existence, like the angels in heaven.
And this is just brilliant. To prove the resurrection, he uses a tactic they can't argue with. He quotes from the book of Exodus, one of the few books the Sadducees actually accepted. He reminds them that when God spoke to Moses at the burning bush, centuries after Abraham died, he said, I am the God of Abraham, present tense. The point is so clear. God is the God of the living, not the dead. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are alive with him. And with that, the Sadducees are silenced.
So after Jesus has masterfully answered every single challenge, the whole tone of the chapter shifts. A scribe, an expert in God's law, comes forward, but he's not there with a trap. He has a genuine question, one that gets right to the very heart of what it means to follow God. He asks, which is the first commandment of all?
And Jesus gives this profound answer that basically summarizes the entire Old Testament. First, he quotes from Deuteronomy chapter 6, "You have to love God with everything you've got, your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength." Then he adds the second one from Leviticus chapter 19, "You have to love your neighbor as yourself." He says, "There is none other commandment greater than these."
And you can tell the scribe really gets it. He's impressed. He agrees that this kind of love for God and for your neighbor is more than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. He understands that a real relationship is way more important than just empty religious rituals. And because of that amazing insight, Jesus tells him, "Thou art not far from the kingdom of God." After that exchange, nobody dared to ask him any more questions. So now, with everyone else silenced, Jesus goes on the offensive again. He poses his own question. See, everyone agreed that the Messiah was the son of David. But Jesus asks, quoting Psalm 110 verse 1, "Why does David himself call the Messiah my Lord? How can the Messiah be both David's descendant, his son, and also his superior, his Lord?" The question is a brilliant pointer to the Messiah's dual nature, fully human and fully divine. And all of this builds up to the chapter's really powerful conclusion. The debate shifts from these big theological ideas to what faith actually looks like in daily life. And here, Jesus gives a really stern warning about hypocrisy. And then he highlights this beautiful example of true sacrificial devotion. He warns the crowd, straight up, beware of the scribes. He totally exposes their religion as nothing more than a performance. It's all about their public image. You know, the fancy robes, the respectful greetings in the marketplace, getting the best seats. But underneath that pious surface, they're greedy. They even devour widows' houses, all while making these long, showy prayers. Jesus says their judgment is going to be that much greater. And to show exactly what he means by this contrast, he does something really simple. He sits down and he watches people putting their offerings into the temple treasury. Lots of wealthy people come by and put in these large sums of money. But then, a poor widow comes up and she puts in just 2 tiny coins, worth less than a penny. And then Jesus says something that must have just floored everybody there. He says this poor widow has actually given more than all the rich people combined. Why? Well, because they gave out of their surplus, from what they wouldn't even miss. But she gave everything she had to live on. In God's economy, it's not the amount that matters. It's the level of sacrifice.
So, after all that, after these intense confrontations and these incredible lessons, what's the takeaway? What are we supposed to do with all this? How do we apply the principles from Mark chapter 12 to our own lives today?
You know, the challenge from this chapter is pretty direct. It's asking us to examine our own hearts. Is any part of our faith just a performance, like it was for the scribes? Are we more concerned with how we look to other people than with our actual real relationship with God? The whole goal is to move away from that kind of hypocrisy and toward the humble, total, sacrificial faith that we see in that poor widow.
And hey, to help you really dig deeper into these truths, make sure you use the flashcards that go along with this lesson. You can also test what you've learned with the Chapter 12 quiz. And of course, your homework is to read ahead to Mark chapter 13, where Jesus is about to deliver one of his most significant prophecies ever.
This has been a presentation by the You Need Faith in Jesus team. Thanks so much for joining this explainer. As you think about this chapter, here's a final thought. If Jesus were to watch you live your life for just one day, what would he see? Would he see the performance of the scribe or the sacrificial faith of the widow? Because what you do with your 2 coins, well, that says everything.